They used my credit card for my sister's $12,500 cruise luxury trip, so I sold my house where they were living rent-free. Imagine waking up to a notification that your family just spent a small fortune on a vacation you weren't even invited to, using your own sweat and tears. It was the ultimate family betrayal, a shocking moment where I realized I was just an ATM with a heartbeat to the people I loved most. I felt humiliated, mocked, and completely backstabbed in a way I couldn't even believe was real. But what happened next? Well, let's just say they didn't realize that when you play with fire, you're the one who gets burned. I had been the good daughter for 32 years, sacrificing my self-worth to keep their heads above water while they cheated me out of my own future. My mother and sister thought they were clever, sailing away on a ship bought with my life's work while I stayed behind to pay the bills. They lied. They shamed me for my success, and they even tried to trap me with residency forms to make it a nightmare to ever move them out. It was a revealed truth that hit me like a physical blow. They didn't want a daughter, they wanted a benefactor. But the truth is, even the most responsible person has a breaking point, and they just crossed mine. So, while they were out at sea, sipping champagne and posting blessed photos on Instagram, I was making some changes of my own. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, and I certainly didn't wait for an apology that would never come. I realized that justice wasn't something I could ask for. It was something I had to take back with both hands. I had a 12-day window while they were away from their phones and far from their manipulation, and I intended to use every single second to reclaim my dignity. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about survival, karma, and the cold, hard reality of what happens when you push a good person too far. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at 3 a.m., a digital scream cutting through the silence of my bedroom. I reached for it, squinting at the screen, expecting a work email or a late-night news alert. Instead, it was an urgent alert from my credit card app, a transaction for $12,500. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I read the merchant's name, Azure Seas Luxury Cruises. Seconds later, a confirmation email arrived in my inbox, detailing a grand royal suite and a guest list that didn't include me. I scrolled down to that digital receipt and felt the blood drain from my face. It was my younger sister, Chloe, and her entourage of friends. My mother, the primary authorized user I'd added years ago for emergencies only, had authorized the full payment for a trip that would set sail in exactly 48 hours. This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated family betrayal executed with the click of a button. The shocking audacity of using my hard-earned savings for a party ship left me gasping for air. I didn't wait until morning. I drove straight to the house I own, the one where my parents live rent-free. My father was away on a business trip, so I found my mother alone in the kitchen, casually sipping coffee as if she hadn't just committed financial infidelity against her own daughter. When I showed her the screen, she didn't flinch, didn't apologize, and certainly didn't look shamed. She just waved her hand dismissively and told me to stop being so dramatic about a little family sharing. It was a classic move, a backstabbed moment wrapped in a mother's fake smile. She looked me in the eye and said, "Destiny, you're a successful architect. You have plenty of money, and Chloe deserves a win." That was the family drama cycle in a nutshell. My labor was always meant to fund Chloe's leisure. I realized then that to them, I wasn't a person. I was just an ATM with a pulse. Right there in front of her, I opened my app, removed her as an authorized user, and froze the card. They had lied to themselves for so long that they actually believed my bank account belonged to the collective. The humiliated feeling I usually felt started to morph into something much colder and sharper. I stood there watching her toast a bagel with electricity I paid for, while she planned the last-minute packing for my sister's getaway. Every cent I'd ever given them flashed before my eyes like a bad movie reel of wasted self-worth. She told me to just let it go, because family is more important than a few numbers on a screen. I nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching my lips as a dark realization began to settle in. She thought the conversation was over, but the justice I was about to seek hadn't even begun. I walked out of that kitchen without another word, my mind already spinning with the implications of what she'd admitted. If they thought they were entitled to my credit line, they clearly felt entitled to everything else I possessed. It was a terrifying realization, but it was also the first time in my life I felt truly awake. As I got into my car, I glanced back at the house, the family home, and saw it for what it really was. They were so excited about their countdown to the cruise that they didn't notice the storm I was bringing. This wasn't just about one cruise. It was the climax of a lifelong saga where I was the supporting character in Chloe's movie. Since we were kids, I was the responsible one, the girl who got straight A's and worked 2 jobs. Chloe was the golden child, the delicate flower who was too sensitive for chores or consequences. Our parents fueled this family betrayal by constantly demanding I help out my sister whenever she stumbled. My dignity was always secondary to Chloe's comfort, and I had been conditioned to accept it. Whenever I tried to set a boundary, my parents would use the ultimate weapon, weaponized guilt and family drama. They'd tell me how lucky I was to be smart, while Chloe struggled to find her path in life. I've paid for her car repairs, her dental bills, and even her botched influencer business ventures without a single thank you. I was constantly being backstabbed by the very people who were supposed to protect my interests. It was a parasitic loop where my success was treated like a family asset to be liquidated. I remember when I bought my first investment property, a fixer-upper on the coast that I poured my soul into. Instead of being proud, my mother cried until I agreed to let them live there temporarily while they downsized. That was 4 years ago, and temporary turned into a permanent free ride that drained my soul. They lived like royalty in my house, while I stayed in a cramped studio apartment closer to the city. I realized I was literally building a life for people who wouldn't even buy me a birthday card. The betrayal ran deeper than money. It was the theft of my time and my emotional energy every single day. They made me feel like I owed them for the sacrifice of raising a child who actually followed the rules. It's a shocking irony that the more I achieved, the more they felt justified in taking from me. Chloe would post photos of her luxury lifestyle on Instagram, while I was working 80-hour weeks to cover the mortgage. I was the engine of their happiness, but I was never invited to the party. I looked at my bank statements from the last 3 years and saw a pattern of systematic financial abuse. It wasn't just the $12,500 cruise. It was the $200 here and the $500 there that added up to a fortune. They had cheated me out of my own future while I was too busy trying to be the good daughter. The truth was staring me in the face. They didn't love me. They loved what I could do for them. And once you see that clearly, you can never go back to being their doormat. I realized that my sister's cruise was more than a vacation. It was a victory lap for her and a middle finger to me. They were literally sailing away on my sweat and tears, laughing all the way to the VIP lounge. The karma they were inviting was something they couldn't even imagine in their most arrogant moments. As I drove back to my small apartment, I started making a list of every debt they had ever forgotten. This was the moment the responsible one decided to stop playing by the family rules. Sitting at my desk, I opened a blank spreadsheet and titled it "The Price of Loyalty," though the cost of betrayal was more accurate. I started digging through years of bank records, utility bills, and property tax statements for the house they occupied. The numbers started adding up. $5,000 for the new roof, $12,000 for the HVAC, and countless emergencies. By the time I reached the current year, the total was hovering near $85,000 of my money. My hands were shaking as the shocking reality of my own exploitation finally hit home. I had been backstabbed not by a sudden blow, but by 1,000 tiny cuts over a decade of helping. Every time my mother called crying about a leak or a bill, she was essentially stealing a piece of my retirement. I realized I'd burned through a massive chunk of my net worth while they lived a life of leisure. They never offered to pay a dime, and I was too blinded by family duty to demand it. The humiliated feeling was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was a financial hostage situation. I looked at the photos of the house. It was pristine, upgraded with the best materials, all on my dime. Meanwhile, I was skipping vacations and driving an old car to ensure they stayed comfortable in their golden years. It was a complete lack of self-worth on my part that allowed this parasitic relationship to flourish for so long. They had lied about their financial struggles while taking every cent I was willing to give. I was the one who was truly poor in spirit and poor in boundaries. I calculated that if I had invested that $85,000, it would be worth nearly double that amount today. That was my freedom they were spending on Chloe's designer handbags and overpriced mimosas at brunch. The family betrayal wasn't just about the cruise, it was the systematic draining of my potential. I felt a surge of vengeance, not the hot, angry kind, but a cold, logical necessity for survival. I needed to stop the bleeding before there was nothing left of me to save. I realized that by helping them, I was actually enabling my own destruction and Chloe's eternal childhood. My dignity demanded that I stop being the silent benefactor of people who didn't even respect me. The justice I needed wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about reclaiming my life. I stared at the final number on the screen, a staggering total that represented years of my life. It was time to close the bank of destiny for good and let the chips fall where they may. As I closed the laptop, I realized I couldn't just ask them to pay me back. They didn't have the money anyway. They had spent it all on the appearance of wealth while I provided the actual foundation. The only way to get my payback was to remove the foundation entirely and let their house of cards collapse. I needed a plan that was as quiet as it was devastating, something they wouldn't see coming. And that's when I remembered the date. The cruise was leaving in exactly 48 hours. 2 days later, the ship finally sailed, and I gained something I hadn't had in years, 12 days of silence without their constant manipulation. My social media feed exploded with the grand send-off I wasn't invited to. There was Chloe, dressed in a $300 sundress, holding a glass of champagne. My parents were flanking her, beaming with pride as they stood in front of the massive luxury liner. The caption read, "Finally living the dream. Huge thanks to Mom for making dreams come true. Family first. Blessed." I watched the videos of them laughing, exploring their Grand Royal Suite, the one that cost me $12,500. They were eating lobster tails and posting about the freedom of the ocean while I was sitting in my office. The infidelity of their affection was sickening. They were celebrating a lifestyle bought with the money they stole from me. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the phone reflecting in my eyes, feeling humiliated. It was the final straw, the moment the last tether of my loyalty finally snapped. The comments section was filled with their friends praising my mother for being such a generous and amazing parent. Not a single person knew that the amazing parent was actually a common thief who backstabbed her eldest daughter. I felt a wave of karma-fueled resolve wash over me as I watched them toast to their well-deserved vacation. They were literally sailing away on my life's work, leaving me to deal with the debt and the mess. It was a shocking display of narcissism that I will never, ever forget. I realized that while they were at sea, they were disconnected from the reality I was about to create. They were in a bubble of luxury, far away from the responsible daughter they treated like a servant. This was the ultimate family betrayal, a public celebration of their theft and my exclusion. But instead of crying, I started to laugh. A low, dry sound that echoed in my quiet apartment. They thought they had escaped the consequences, but they had actually just given me the perfect window. The vengeance I felt wasn't a roar. It was a whisper of absolute certainty that everything was about to change. I looked at the Family First hashtag and felt a cold sense of justice settle deep in my bones. If they wanted to play games with my life, I was going to show them how a real professional plays. They were out there enjoying the sunset on the Caribbean, completely unaware that the sun was setting on their lifestyle too. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and opened a new tab on my browser. I spent the next hour downloading every single photo and video they posted as evidence of their lifestyle. If they were going to claim poverty later, I wanted the world to see the lobster and the champagne. My self-worth was finally pushing back against the years of being their silent, suffering martyr. I was done being the good girl who took the hits and kept on smiling for the family photo. As the ship's horn blared in one of Chloe's videos, I knew it was the starting gun for my own operation. I checked the cruise itinerary, 12 days at sea where they would be pampered, distracted, and, most importantly, completely out of reach. It was the perfect heist window, a gift from the universe that I intended to use to its full potential. My vengeance was no longer a dream, it was a scheduled project with a clear deadline. I had exactly 12 days to dismantle the life they had built on my back. I wasn't selling the house to punish them. I was doing it to stop them from ever holding my future hostage again. I realized that without their constant gaslighting and emotional manipulation, I could finally think clearly. The family betrayal had provided me with the one thing I needed most: space to act without interference. I wasn't going to spend these 12 days crying or waiting for an apology that would never come. I was going to use every second to ensure that when that ship docked, they had nowhere to go. The justice I was seeking required speed, precision, and a complete lack of mercy. I felt a strange sense of peace as I looked at the calendar and marked the day of their return. It was like a countdown to a new life, one where I wasn't an ATM with a heartbeat. My dignity was returning to me with every plan I made and every phone call I prepared. They had backstabbed me one too many times, and now the blade was firmly in my hand. This wasn't about being mean. It was about being free from a lifetime of parasitic abuse. I knew my mother would try to call once or twice, maybe to ask for more money for excursions. But out there in the middle of the ocean, I could just ignore her, and she'd assume I was just busy at work. She had no idea that the busy at work daughter was actually working on her eviction and the sale of her home. The shocking part was how easy it felt once I decided to stop caring about their feelings. They had spent years ignoring mine, so it was only fair to return the favor. I spent the first night of their cruise organizing my documents, deeds, and bank records into a master file. I was a senior architect for a reason. I knew how to build structures, and I knew how to tear them down. This was my most important project yet, and I wasn't going to let a single detail slip through the cracks. The truth was going to be my weapon, and the law was going to be my shield. I felt a surge of adrenaline that no amount of coffee could ever provide. As the first day of their window came to a close, I felt a sense of quiet triumph over my own fear. I was finally taking control of the family drama instead of letting it control me and my bank account. The reclaiming of my life was officially underway, and there was no turning back now. I looked out my window at the city lights and whispered, "Bon voyage," to the family that didn't deserve me. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, and the first person I needed to call was someone they didn't even know. The next morning, I drove to the house to gather the rest of my personal documents from the home office. As I was clearing out my desk, I found a folder tucked away in the back of a drawer I rarely used. Inside was a residency declaration form, filled out in my mother's unmistakable loopy handwriting. She was attempting to legally establish them as permanent residents at my address without my knowledge. This wasn't just a cruise theft. It was a trap designed to create permanent occupancy rights and make it a legal nightmare to ever remove them. My blood ran cold as I realized the depth of the betrayal they were plotting while living under my roof. They weren't just guests. They were trying to become squatters with rights to make it impossible for me to ever sell. This was a shocking escalation from financial abuse to a full-blown attempt at property hijacking. I felt backstabbed in a way that made the cruise charge look like petty shoplifting in comparison. They wanted to own me, and they wanted to own the roof over my head for life. I realized then that my kindness had been interpreted as weakness, and they were preparing to feast on the remains. The family drama had reached a level of survival. It was either them or me, and I chose me. If I didn't act now, I could spend the next 10 years in a legal nightmare trying to reclaim my own home. My self-worth screamed at me to burn the bridge before they could cross it and take everything. The truth was that they were predators, and I was the prey they had grown too comfortable with. I sat on the floor of the office, holding that forged residency form, feeling a cold, crystalline anger. They had lied to my face for years about just needing a little more time to find a place of their own. All the while, they were researching how to trap me in a possession nightmare. It was a family betrayal so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest, pressing the air out of my lungs. But that weight quickly turned into the fuel I needed to execute my final silent move. I took a photo of the form and sent it to my lawyer, my hands steady and my mind sharp. I wasn't going to confront them. I was going to erase their ability to ever use that form against me. The justice I was seeking had to be absolute, leaving no room for them to wiggle back into my life. I felt a sense of karma brewing, a storm that would wash away the years of their manipulation in one swift stroke. They were out there enjoying the ocean breeze, while I was preparing to pull the ground from under their feet. I looked around the house one last time, seeing it not as a home, but as a liability I needed to liquidate. The memories of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings were now tainted by the ink on that residency form. My dignity was no longer for sale, and I was done being the silent partner in my own destruction. I grabbed my laptop, locked the door, and walked away from the family home for the very last time. The next person to walk through that door wouldn't be me, and it wouldn't be them. I called Patricia, a high-stakes realtor I'd worked with on several commercial projects, and told her I needed a ghost sale. I explained the situation, the family betrayal, the stolen money, and the residency trap they were trying to set. Patricia didn't judge. She just listened with the cold, professional focus of a woman who had seen it all. She confirmed that since there was no lease and I was the sole owner, I could sell the property immediately. This was the justice I needed. A legal, binding transaction that would bypass their occupancy schemes. The plan was simple but brutal. We would list the house as an investor special with a rapid closing requirement. I told Patricia I was willing to take a slight hit on the price if it meant a cash deal that closed within 10 days. My vengeance was being packaged as a real estate deal, and it felt surprisingly professional and clean. I felt a surge of self-worth knowing that I was using my professional network to solve a personal nightmare. They had used my credit. I was going to use my assets. Patricia warned me that the new owners would have the right to change the locks and issue a 30-day notice to vacate. I told her that was exactly the point. I wanted the bad guy to be a faceless corporation, not me. This way, the family drama would be redirected toward a legal entity that didn't care about their tears or guilt trips. I was reclaiming my dignity by stepping out of the line of fire and letting the law do its job. It was a shocking realization that I could actually end this without a single shouting match. We scheduled a pocket listing immediately, reaching out to her network of aggressive cash buyers who didn't mind a tenant-occupied challenge. I spent the afternoon signing digital disclosures and providing the proof of my sister's theft as the reason for the urgent sale. The truth was my greatest ally, and the urgency of my situation actually made the deal more attractive to certain buyers. I was being backstabbed by family, but I was being supported by professionals who knew my value. I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders with every document I signed. I realized that by the time they got back from their lobster dinners, the house wouldn't even belong to me anymore. They'd be knocking on a door that belonged to a stranger, holding a key that no longer turned the lock. The karma of their cruise was going to be a very long, very quiet walk to a motel room. I felt a sense of reclaiming my power that was more intoxicating than any drink they were served on that ship. The quiet plan was in motion, and the gears were turning faster than I ever imagined. I went back to my studio apartment and slept for the first time in days, knowing the clock was working for me. My justice wasn't a loud explosion. It was the silent scratching of a pen on a contract and the hum of a wire transfer. They were dreaming of Caribbean islands, while I was dreaming of a future where I didn't have to look over my shoulder. The betrayal was finally being met with a consequence that matched its scale. And the best part was, they wouldn't hear a thing until it was far too late. Within 48 hours, Patricia called me with a bite. A man named Gerald, an investor who specialized in problem properties. He didn't care about the cruise, the family drama, or the residency form. He only cared about the equity. He offered an all-cash deal, 10% below market value, but with a closing date of exactly 7 days. It was the perfect payback delivered in a manila envelope, and I didn't hesitate for a single second to accept. My self-worth was worth more than the 10% I was losing in the sale price. Gerald was a no-nonsense guy who understood that occupant occupied meant I wanted out, and I wanted out now. He accepted the property as is, with only a quick walkthrough to confirm the structure while the house was empty. The shocking speed of the process was a testament to how badly I needed this chapter of my life to end. I felt a sense of justice knowing that a professional shark was about to take over the house they treated like a playground. They had played me for a fool, but they were about to meet a real player. I signed the initial agreement electronically while sitting in a coffee shop, watching a video Chloe had just posted of a beach party. The contrast was almost poetic. She was dancing in the sand, and I was signing away the roof over her head. The betrayal was being settled in real time, one digital signature at a time, across thousands of miles of ocean. I felt a sense of dignity return to me as I realized I was finally protecting myself the way I should have years ago. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the cold, hard necessity of survival. Patricia handled the inspections and the title search with the precision of a surgeon, keeping everything under the radar as requested. We didn't even put a "for sale" sign in the yard, ensuring the neighbors wouldn't tip off my parents via social media. It was a silent sale for a silent vengeance, and everything was lining up with terrifying perfection. I felt a surge of reclaiming my life every time a task-completed notification popped up on my phone. They had cheated me out of my peace, so I was buying it back with the house they stole. Gerald's team confirmed they had the funds ready and were just waiting on the final title clearance from the county. I realized that in less than a week, I would have a 6-figure check in my account and 0 ties to that house. The family betrayal was being liquidated into a fresh start, a clean slate that they could never touch again. I felt humiliated no more. I felt like the architect of my own destiny, designing a life without parasites. The truth was going to hit them like a tidal wave the moment they stepped off that ship. As the closing date approached, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and absolute, unwavering calm. I was about to do something unforgivable in the eyes of my family, and for the first time, I didn't care. Their opinion of me was a currency that had lost all its value the moment they charged that cruise to my card. The justice of the situation was so clear that any lingering guilt was burned away by the memory of my mother's dismissive laugh. I was ready to cross the point of no return and never look back. Closing day arrived like a quiet sunrise, a Tuesday morning that changed the trajectory of my entire existence. I sat at my laptop and executed the final digital signatures, the ink drying on a life I no longer wanted. Within 2 hours, the notification hit. Wire transfer received, and the balance of my account swelled to a life-changing amount. The house was no longer mine. The debt was no longer mine. The family drama was now Gerald's problem. I felt a surge of justice so powerful it brought tears to my eyes, not of sadness, but of pure relief. I immediately filed a formal report for financial misappropriation and disputed the $12,500 cruise charge. I provided the bank with the evidence of the unauthorized use and the forged residency form as proof of their intent to defraud me. With the house sold, I had the financial cushion to fight them as long as it took to get every cent back. The betrayal was finally being met with a force they couldn't manipulate with tears or family excuses. I was no longer the girl who helped. I was the woman who enforced her own boundaries. Meanwhile, Gerald was already at the property, his crew moving with the efficiency of a military unit. They changed the locks and immediately posted a formal notice in the front window. It wasn't a lockout. It was a legal warning that all access for retrieving belongings had to be scheduled through the new property manager. My parents' belongings were still inside, but they were now behind a lock they didn't have a key for. It was a shocking turn of events that would have seemed impossible just 10 days ago. The vengeance was complete, and I hadn't even had to raise my voice. I felt a profound sense of dignity as I realized I had legally and ethically removed myself from their abuse. I wasn't evicting my parents. I had simply sold an asset that was costing me my mental and financial health. If they ended up in a motel, it was because they had spent their own savings on a luxury cruise instead of a place to live. The karma was so symmetrical, it felt like a work of art, a masterpiece of natural consequences. They had backstabbed me for the last time, and the wound was already starting to heal. I deleted the family group chat and blocked my sister's social media accounts, finally cutting the digital umbilical cord. I didn't want to see the photos of the cruise anymore. I wanted to see the photos of my own future. My self-worth was finally the priority, and it felt like a heavy armor I was finally strong enough to wear. The truth of their situation wouldn't hit them for another few days, and I intended to enjoy every second of that silence. I was a free woman, and the price of that freedom was a house I never should have bought for them. I spent the rest of the day in a park, watching the sun set and feeling the weight of the world slide off my shoulders. I had reclaiming my peace, my money, and my future in one fell swoop of professional competence. There was no more responsible daughter to kick around. There was only a woman who knew her value and how to protect it. The justice was done, and the silence was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. But I knew the silence wouldn't last forever, and I was prepared for the storm. The next 3 days were the most peaceful of my entire adult life. A quiet bubble of me time I hadn't enjoyed since college. I didn't have to worry about emergency calls from my mother or Chloe's endless demands for just a small loan. I spent my time in therapy, finally unpacking the decades of family betrayal and financial manipulation I'd endured. My therapist called it extrication, but to me, it felt like a long overdue act of justice for my own soul. I was learning that my self-worth wasn't tied to how much I could provide for people who didn't love me. I took some of the sale money and booked a small, quiet cabin in the mountains for the following month, a trip I actually paid for myself. It was a symbolic act of reclaiming my right to enjoy the fruits of my own labor without guilt. I realized how much of my life had been spent looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next backstabbed moment from my own blood. The dignity of having my own space and my own secrets was a luxury I had never truly understood. I was finally breathing air that wasn't heavy with the expectations of others. I spent my evenings reading books, cooking actual meals, and ignoring the ghost of my old life that still tried to haunt me. I knew the ship was making its way back to the harbor, and the peace was only a temporary ceasefire. But instead of fear, I felt a cold, sharp readiness for the inevitable family drama that would follow their return. I had my documents, my lawyer on speed dial, and a heart that had finally turned to ice toward their manipulation. The truth was my fortress, and I was safely tucked inside it, waiting for the waves to crash. I realized that the responsible daughter they knew was dead, replaced by a woman who wouldn't be moved by, "But we're family." That phrase had been the cage they kept me in, but I had finally realized the bars were made of paper, and I could walk through them. My vengeance was not an act of hate, but an act of profound self-love that I had denied myself for too long. I was finally seeing the karma of their actions not as a punishment I was inflicting, but as a result they had earned. It was a liberating perspective that changed everything about how I saw the world. I prepared a final message for them, a short and clear statement that would leave no room for debate or negotiation. I didn't want to fight. I wanted an ending, a final curtain call on the theater of their entitlement. The justice I had achieved was legal, financial, and emotional, and I wasn't going to give back a single inch of that ground. I felt a sense of self-worth that was so solid it felt like a physical shield against the coming rage. The storm was coming, but I had already built a lighthouse that would stand against any tide. On the final night of their cruise, I turned off my phone at 8 p.m. and went to bed early, sleeping a deep, dreamless sleep. I knew they would be docking at dawn, excited to tell me all about the fun they had on my dime. They'd be expecting me to pick them up, or at least have the fridge stocked for their return to their house. The shocking reality of what they were actually returning to was a gift I had wrapped in legal paper and left on the doorstep. The calm was over, but I was the one holding the remote control now. I woke up to a phone that was vibrating so hard it was dancing across the nightstand like a frantic insect. 62 missed calls, 48 voicemails, a barrage of texts that started with, "Where are you?" and quickly descended into, "What did you do?" I didn't even have to listen to the messages to know the family drama had reached its peak. They had arrived at the house to find the locks changed and a stranger's name on the notice to vacate in the window. The shocking collapse of their entitled world was finally officially underway. I sat up, drank a glass of water, and finally hit play on the first voicemail. It was my mother, her voice a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Destiny, the key isn't working, and there's some weird paper on the window. Call me back, we have a lot of luggage." By the fifth message, the tone shifted to a shrill, hysterical scream about illegal eviction, and how could you do this? Not a single message mentioned the $12,500 they stole or the residency form they forged. Their infidelity to the truth was as consistent as ever, even in the face of total ruin. Chloe's voicemails were the worst, pure, unadulterated rage mixed with the spoiled whining of a child who lost her favorite toy. She called me a bitter, jealous hag and told me I was dead to her for throwing our parents on the street. The humiliated daughter they expected to cave was nowhere to be found, and their panic was a symphony of karma in my ears. They were literally standing on the sidewalk with their cruise souvenirs, realizing that the responsible sister had finally quit. I felt a surge of justice that was so cold it was almost beautiful. My father's voice was the last one I listened to, a low rumble of disappointment that used to make me crumble into pieces. He talked about family honor and the duty of a daughter, trying to use the old tools of manipulation one last time. But the backstabbed feeling I used to get was replaced by a sense of profound boredom. I'd heard it all before, and it didn't work anymore. Their lied-to-themselves version of reality was crashing against the rocks of the actual law, and they were losing. I was reclaiming my dignity by simply refusing to engage in the theater they were creating. They were calling from a nearby motel, apparently having realized that Gerald's property manager wasn't going to let them in without an appointment. The family betrayal was now a matter of public record, and their friends on social media were starting to ask questions. I saw a post from my mother claiming they were victims of a scam, still unable to admit that I was the one who ended it. The truth was a bitter pill, and they were choking on it while I was making myself a fresh cup of coffee. It was the most satisfying breakfast I had ever had in my life. I realized that throughout all 48 voicemails, not one person had offered to pay back the money or apologized for the theft. Their only concern was the loss of their free ride and the blow to their public image. This confirmed everything I had felt. The justice I sought was the only language they would ever truly understand. My self-worth was no longer up for debate, and I was done listening to the echoes of their entitlement. It was time to send the final message and close the book on this tragedy forever. I spent 30 minutes crafting the perfect response, making sure every word was a stone that would seal the door behind me. I didn't use insults. I didn't use "why did you do this" questions, and I certainly didn't offer a way back. I simply wrote, "Both sides made choices, and choices have consequences. You chose to steal $12,500 and forge residency documents. I chose to sell my property and protect my future." The justice of the statement was undeniable, a mirror held up to their own family betrayal that they couldn't look away from. I added one final sentence. "Do not contact me again. Any further communication will be handled by my attorney and the police regarding the fraud." I felt a surge of dignity as I hit send, knowing that I was finally taking the power back from people who never deserved it. I didn't wait for a reply, didn't check to see if it was read, and didn't care about their reaction. I immediately went through my contacts and blocked my mother, my father, and Chloe on every platform known to man. The silence that followed was the most expensive and beautiful thing I'd ever bought. I felt a sense of reclaiming my own identity that went far beyond the money or the house. I was no longer the bank or the safety net. I was just Destiny, a woman with a clean slate and a full bank account. The karma of their actions was now their burden to carry, and I was officially walking away from the weight. I realized that the best vengeance isn't a loud fight, but a quiet, successful life lived far away from your tormentors. They had backstabbed me, but I had used the wound to find my way out of the dark. I sat on my balcony, watching the world go by, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over me like a warm blanket. The family drama was a closed chapter, a story I would tell in therapy but never live again. My self-worth was finally intact, and I knew that no one would ever use my credit or my kindness against me ever again. I was the architect of a new life, and this time, the foundation was made of boundaries and self-respect. The truth had set me free, and I was never going back to that cage. I realized that by cutting them off, I was actually giving them the greatest gift possible: the necessity of taking responsibility for themselves. If they had to work, or downsize, or face the consequences of their theft, that was their journey to take, not mine to fix. I was done being the hero in a story where I was actually the victim of a long-term infidelity of character. The justice was complete, and I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt since I was a little girl. I was free, truly and completely free, and the future was mine to design. I deleted the call logs, cleared the voicemails, and put my phone away for the rest of the weekend. I didn't need to know where they were or how they were going to pay for their motel stay. That was the beauty of the silence. Their problems were no longer my problems, and their rage was just noise in a vacuum. I was stepping into a new version of myself, one who knew that family betrayal doesn't require a family response. It requires a personal revolution, and mine had just successfully ended. 3 days after the great silence began, I heard a heavy, rhythmic pounding on my apartment door that made my heart skip a beat. I didn't even have to look through the peephole to know who was standing on the other side. My mother's voice, cracked and frantic, was calling my name, while Chloe's muffled curses echoed in the hallway. They had found out where I was staying, likely by badgering one of my few remaining family friends for the address. The family drama was trying to force its way into my new sanctuary, but I was ready. I didn't open the door. I didn't even acknowledge that I was home, despite the light peeking through the cracks. I sat on my sofa, gripping a cup of tea, and listened to them alternate between begging for just 5 minutes and calling me a monster. The shocking lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. They were standing in a hallway, blaming me for their motel stay while they were still tanned from my cruise. The humiliated feeling I expected to have never came. I just felt a deep, exhausted pity for their desperation. After 20 minutes of pounding, the hallway went quiet, and I heard the soft slide of paper being pushed under my door. It was a 3-page handwritten letter from my mother, a masterpiece of manipulative guilt and betrayal-dodging rhetoric. She talked about her failing health, Chloe's fragile mental state, and how I was spitting on my father's legacy. Not once did she mention the 12th 1500 or the forged residency forms that started this entire vengeance cycle. It was a letter written by a woman who refused to believe the ATM had finally shut down. I picked up the letter with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated and walked it straight to the shredder in my office. I didn't need to read the rest. I had been reading variations of that same letter my entire life. My dignity demanded that I stop participating in their guilt Olympics once and for all. They wanted me to feel shamed for protecting myself, but all I felt was the satisfaction of a boundary well kept. This was the final gasp of their control, and I was letting it expire in the silence of my apartment. I called the building's security and calmly informed them that 3 unauthorized individuals were harassing me at my door. I provided their descriptions and asked that they be trespassed from the property immediately and permanently. I felt a surge of self-worth as I took the legal steps to ensure my home remained a place of peace. I was no longer the good daughter who took the hits. I was a tenant who deserved safety and respect. The justice of the situation was being enforced by men in uniforms, and it felt incredibly right. I watched through the window as security escorted them out of the building, my mother gesturing wildly while Chloe filmed the whole thing on her phone. I knew that video would end up on social media with a caption about evil sisters, and I truly didn't care. The truth was on my side, the law was on my side, and most importantly, the money was in my account. I was reclaiming my life from the wreckage of their entitlement, and no amount of door pounding could stop me. The confrontation was over, and I was still standing. A week later, a formal-looking envelope arrived from a local law firm, claiming to represent my parents in a wrongful eviction and elder abuse suit. The letter demanded that I pay them $50,000 in relocation compensation or face a grueling public court battle. It was a classic backstabbed move, a final attempt to extort the very money I had saved by selling the house. They were trying to use the legal system to continue the family betrayal they had started with a credit card. But they had forgotten one very important thing. I don't play games when it comes to my survival. I took the letter to my own attorney, a shark named Marcus, who specialized in property law and domestic fraud. He laughed when he read the claims, noting that elder abuse doesn't apply when the elders are stealing five-figure sums for luxury cruises. He pointed out that since they were at-will occupants and the house was sold to a third party, their wrongful eviction claim was legally dead on arrival. The justice of the situation was so skewed in my favor that the letter was essentially an expensive piece of fiction. They were trying to bluff a woman who already held all the cards. Marcus sent a scathing cease and desist letter back to their lawyer, along with copies of the unauthorized cruise charges and the forged residency form. He made it clear that if they proceeded, we would immediately countersue for grand larceny and criminal fraud. The truth hit their legal team like a ton of bricks, and the lawsuit evaporated faster than Chloe's influencer career. It was a shocking but predictable end to their attempt at legal warfare. They had tried to play the victim, but the evidence showed they were the predators. I felt a profound sense of dignity, knowing that I hadn't backed down in the face of their intimidation. My self-worth had been tested by a formal legal threat, and I had come out on the other side stronger and more resolved. They had lied to their own lawyer about the circumstances, and now they were left with a legal bill they couldn't pay. The karma was relentless, turning every weapon they tried to use against me back onto themselves. I was finally, legally, and permanently untouchable. The lawyer letters stopped, the emails ceased, and the family friends who had been flying monkeys for them suddenly went quiet. I realized that once people saw the actual evidence of the theft, they didn't want to be associated with my family either. The justice I had sought was now a matter of reputation, and theirs was rightfully in tatters. I was reclaiming my name and my life, while they were left to deal with the fallout of their own greed. It was a clean break, a surgical removal of the cancer that had been eating my life. I spent that weekend at a spa, treating myself to the kind of luxury they thought they were entitled to at my expense. As I sat in the sauna, I realized I hadn't thought about the lawsuit or the house in over 48 hours. The vengeance was over, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of personal accomplishment. I had protected myself, I had won, and I had done it all while keeping my integrity intact. The empty legal threat was the final hurdle, and I had cleared it with room to spare. 6 months have passed since I watched that luxury cruise ship disappear into the horizon with my family and my $12,500. Today, I'm sitting on the porch of a small, beautiful home I bought in a different city, one where they don't have the address. I invested the sale money wisely, and for the first time in my life, I have a fuck you fund that ensures I'll never be anyone's victim again. The justice I found wasn't just in the bank account. It was in the silence of my phone and the peace in my heart. I've realized that self-worth is the best currency a woman can ever hold. I still attend therapy once a week, working through the scars of the family betrayal. But the wounds are finally closed. I've learned that family is a title that must be earned through respect and love, not a birthright to someone else's labor. The karma of their situation is no longer my concern. I heard through the grapevine they're living in a small apartment, and Chloe is working a real job for the first time. I don't feel joy at their struggle, but I don't feel the need to fix it anymore either. I chose freedom over revenge, and it was the smartest trade I ever made. My new life is filled with people who value me for who I am, not for what I can buy for them. I took that real vacation I promised myself, a trip to the Swiss Alps where I hiked, breathed fresh air, and didn't check my bank account once. I've reclaimed my dignity and built a life that is entirely, unapologetically mine. The truth is, I didn't just sell a house. I sold a version of myself that was a martyr for people who didn't care if I drowned. I am the architect of my own happiness now, and the foundation is solid as a rock. I sometimes think about that night I saw the $12,500 notification and how my world felt like it was ending. Now I see it as the best investment I ever made, the price I had to pay to finally see the infidelity of their love. It was a shocking catalyst for a transformation I didn't know I was capable of. I am no longer the responsible one who takes the hits. I am the woman who defines the rules. My justice is the life I'm living right now, far away from the drama and the theft. I've started a small foundation that helps women who are victims of financial abuse and family manipulation. It's my way of turning that backstabbed moment into something that can heal others who are still trapped in the good daughter cage. My self-worth is now used to build others up, rather than being drained to keep parasites afloat. It's a powerful feeling to know that your worst betrayal can become your greatest strength. I am destiny, and I am finally, truly home. The sun is setting over the mountains, and for the first time in 32 years, I don't feel a single ounce of guilt. I've blocked the noise, I've secured my future, and I've learned that you can't save people who are determined to sink. The vengeance is gone, leaving only the quiet, steady hum of a life well lived. I pick up my book, take a sip of tea, and smile at the beautiful, perfect silence of my own making. This isn't just a happy ending, it's a brand new, glorious beginning. This story is a powerful reminder that family should never be an excuse for abuse or entitlement. I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal that pushed you to your absolute limit? How did you reclaim your self-worth and find the justice you deserved? Leave a comment below with your own stories of survival and how you dealt with the people who tried to take advantage of your kindness. Your reflection might be the very thing someone else needs to hear to find their own path to freedom. Let's start a conversation about boundaries, karma, and the importance of protecting your own peace over toxic loyalty. Was I right to sell the house, or did I go too far in my quest for justice? I'm curious to know your thoughts on whether choices have consequences applies even when it's your own flesh and blood. Don't hold back. Be as provocative and honest as you feel, because the truth is often messy and complicated. Your insights help us all understand where to draw the line between helping and being exploited. If you found this story as eye-opening as it was intense, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications. We're dedicated to bringing you more provocative insights and shocking stories that challenge the way you think about relationships and self-respect. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the world of family drama, vengeance, and the ultimate journey to reclaiming your life. You don't want to miss our next expose on what happens when the golden child finally meets their match. See you in the next one.